Happy Friday, everyone. Welcome to the WSBA Crypto Roundup. Today is Friday, January 16th, 2026. Good to have you all with us. Ron Quaranta here with our special guest, the one, the only Adam Goldberg, Product Counsel for Crypto at Figure Technology Markets. I just got off a call with Josh. I think she's going to be joining us soon. And David Brill is on a long-deserved vacation, so we'll see him again next week. Adam, thanks for being with us.
Thanks so much. Pleasure being here.
Before we begin, for everyone in the audience watching us on YouTube, on LinkedIn Live, on X, thank you so much for joining us. Please subscribe and please share. If you've got questions for Adam or I, and hopefully Josh when she shows up, please put them in the chat. We're happy to address them as well. And obviously keep in mind, nothing discussed is any sort of advice. And really what we're discussing are our own personal opinions, not necessarily the opinions of respective firms. And there she is, the one and only Joshua Ashley Klayman. Josh, good morning.
Good morning. How are you guys?
I am doing well. Josh, Adam, let's dive into it. Again, David, we miss you. I hope you're watching from the super yacht someplace. Adam, Josh, I want to talk about this. Josh, for the years we've been discussing this, and we've talked about markets, we've talked about builders be building, and all of the really important stuff that really has evolved the ecosystem. Adam, I'm going to say it. I hate to believe it, but some part of it always comes down to politics. Adam, for the audience, let's talk a little bit about it. We've really been struggling for quite a while now, looking at our market structure bill. We left the holidays. Everyone was kind of happy. Bitcoin broke 90,000. Then a couple of days ago, it was, things look ugly. What is happening politically, Adam?
So one thing I'll say just as a preface, all successful legislative efforts have had moments like we had a couple days ago with Brian Armstrong coming out against the bill. Every major bill that's ever passed has looked at points like it was going to die. So just because we're having a setback doesn't mean that the passage won't eventually happen. We saw this with Dodd-Frank. We saw this with Obamacare. We saw this with One Big Beautiful Bill. There was even some funny they had to make some deals with senators related to Alaska and other things. Typically, these things can be worked out. So I'll just add that as kind of a note. What had happened the other day was one thing that we always knew was going to happen is once legislative text finally came out, there were going to be winners and losers. And that's the thing about this process is everyone was collaborating and supportive of market structure and getting rules for crypto that were codified on the books. But once you do that, certain winners and losers are going to emerge in whatever choices the legislators make in the text they write. What had happened is the Senate Banking Committee released a draft in advance. They were supposed to have a markup yesterday. It was long awaited. And what had happened was there was a very carefully delicate deal on stablecoin rewards that had been worked out to get Genius passed. Some of that deal was undone in the Senate banking draft in a way that particularly Coinbase was not a fan of, especially Brian Armstrong, and that caused him to publicly come out against the bill. And when he comes out against the bill, it means Coinbase comes out against the bill, Stand With Crypto comes out against the bill, which is their essentially like activist arm, and then also Fair Shake comes out against the bill, which was the largest donator in the last election cycle.
Yep.
My personal opinion is you're not going to get market structure legislation if Coinbase and Fair Shake and Stand With Crypto are not supporting it. If they're against it, basically what needs to happen is you likely need 8 to 9 Democrats. You likely will get 11 to 12 to 13 Democrats in the Senate that could vote for this to get over the magical 60 vote cloture threshold. Most of those Democrats got lots of donations from the Fair Shake PAC, and they are seen as allies of the crypto industry.
Yeah.
They need cover from that lobbying arm from the industry to say, hey, vote for this bill. They are not going to line up and vote for a bill that Brian Armstrong, Coinbase, Fair Shake, and Stand With Crypto are against. It's just not going to happen. So that's basically where we are right now is they pulled the markup. They have to kind of somewhat go back to the drawing board and see if they can come to some compromise language. And then hopefully everything is back on track by next week when the Ag Committee is supposed to release their draft. And then they're supposed to have a markup the following week. All TBD at the moment, but that's kind of where we are.
Go ahead, Josh.
I have a question for you, Adam. And I guess it's for Ron as well. A lot of times I hear, well, okay, well, if there was agreement in Genius, which was, of course, sent down from the Senate to the House, and the House, had to essentially, well, didn't have to pass it, but, was directed to pass it. Some people say, well, what happened between then and now to change in the Senate? And so one thing I wonder is, did the banking lobby just not notice it before, or was it always left as we'll fix?
It was the holidays,
fix
Josh.
this later.
It was So I would say the two most powerful lobbies in Washington are the bank lobby, and particularly not just the big bank lobby. When the big banks can partner with the community banks, that is a very strong lobby, because then you get a lot of the senators that are rural constituencies that very much care about the community banks. Mm-hmm. If they line up for something, they are a very powerful lobby. The crypto lobby is a very powerful lobby as well, and was the biggest donor last cycle. It seems the crypto lobby was very prepared and ingenious and won that battle, and the banks were kind of caught off guard, didn't realize how big of a threat stablecoin rewards posed to them, did not realize Coinbase's business model. Again, this is a lack of education on their part. They were ready this time, and it seems that they got to their friendly members on the Senate Banking Committee, whoever was writing the bill, and they got a version of the stablecoin rewards language that they approved of. Clearly, that was not run past Brian Armstrong, Coinbase, and them, because they did not approve. So I think what we saw is, in this skirmish, the bank lobby won. Whether or not they will win the war remains to be seen. But it's exactly that, Josh, as you point. I would say it's the bank lobby that came in and kind of put their stamp on it, and that caused kind of the biggest player in crypto in America to come out against it.
Adam, Josh, you both raise important points. And Josh, I'd like to dive into this with you. You and I have chatted about this in the past. Some of the news that we've seen from the banks writ large has been, this is terrible, this is bad for the banking business. And I've seen some pretty bad is the wrong word, pretty difficult to digest hyperbole from some folks on Capitol Hill, Adam, which is, well, they're going to destroy savings accounts in the United States. They're going to, all of this kind of hyperbole around the impact of crypto and stable coins on global banking and banks in the United States. Josh, is that an overblown concern?
I mean, I think you're right in that, hyperbole sells headlines, right? And it also, I guess, influences people and sometimes makes friends or doesn't make friends. But I mean, I think there is some truth to the fact that people are very interested in stable coins, and they'd be very interested in receiving yield on stable coins, right? And so I think some of what we've seen about potential flows of deposits into stable coins, I think, directionally, I don't think it doesn't strike me as being wrong. I don't have the data, right? And I don't have the crystal ball that David has, wherever he is. But yeah, I mean, from my perspective, it seems like, yes, clearly the banks are concerned about that, or they wouldn't be pushing back potentially, or would be pushing back less strongly against this ability of certain market participants to pay yield. But yeah, I mean, do I think it's going to ruin savings as we know it? No. What about you, Adam? What do you think?
Well, I think it's not so much that it will ruin savings. I don't think my parents or grandparents recently passed, but I think people of kind of the generation above me and above that, I don't think you're going to see them draining out their savings account and going into a stablecoin rewards program like Coinbase, for example, using USDC. But I think the reason the banks are taking this so seriously is it's an existential threat to their core business model, which is fractionalized lending. They give you 10 basis points, 50 basis points in your average checking account, and they go to the Fed window and they borrow, and they can get 3.5%, 4% interest. And then that is the spread in which they get all of their profits and they get all of their operating activities. Any drain from that flow of people going into a savings account and getting a very, very small yield, and the bank's pocketing all of those basis points when they go get interest at the Fed, is a big threat to them. And I think Treasury produced a study around the time of Genius that said you could see as much as $6 trillion flow out of the banking system and into stable coins. Where it gets complicated, though, is yes, it's bad for the bank's potential business model. And yes, it could have wider ramifications in the economy if the banks aren't able to make small loans to businesses and stuff. And that's where the community banking angle really comes in. But stablecoins are backed, at least post Genius, if they're a Genius Act compliant stablecoin, are backed by high quality liquid assets, which are really just US treasuries and bank deposits. And so these are some of the safest assets like you can have. And one of the reasons people like stablecoins is, unlike fractionalized lending, where you don't know, where you're only insured with the FDIC up to a certain amount, and then if there's a run on the bank, you technically could lose your money because, again, they don't have all your money. They're fractionalized lending. They're taking a portion of it, lending it out, and making a spread. Unlike a stablecoin, where a stablecoin is fully backed one-to-one with U.S. treasuries. So it's like you feel secure that your money is there because you know your money is there. And one of the things that people have always pointed out is this ban on yield doesn't really make sense because you're just making the stablecoin provider essentially keep the yield as profit, because they keep the yield and they would like to remit it back to the customer. They would love to give the customer interest to make their product more attractive, but the Genius Act said they could not. And so obviously Coinbase and others have had artful ways of getting around this by offering USDC rewards, which are very similar to interest, but also those aren't free either, because I think now Coinbase has restricted the USDC rewards to Coinbase One members, where I think you have to pay like $90 a year or something to be a Coinbase One member to get the interest. So it's a complicated problem. But I do think that the banks are slightly exaggerating the impact. But I think the reason they're taking it so seriously is it's like it strikes at the core of the business model.
Adam, really good point. Go ahead, Josh.
I was just going to say, I mean, doesn't crypto in general, or even if we think about Bitcoin, right, just holding aside stable coins, Bitcoin, proponents of Bitcoin and others have been trying to call out fractional reserve banking and make people aware of some of the risks around it for a long time. And I'm not being critical of banks. I love banks, but I also, I love other innovations as well, including
Josh coming out.
Yeah, but I mean, seriously, but I think like truly that's one of the great things, about Bitcoin. And I think that's something that Caitlin Long for a long time was explaining, right, with Custodia, and explaining the difference between that model and fractional reserve banking. So I can see why there would be a concern about, chipping away at core business. At the same time, I think this has long been kind of coming as people are raising awareness of what fractional reserve lending is.
Yeah. Adam, go ahead, and then I want to add a couple of comments. I've got some things to think about.
Yeah, well, I was just going to say, I do want to note that there's two sides to the coin too, right? Like hurting fractional reserve banking and making it harder for your JP Morgans of the world, or let's say the community banks, to make loans. Yeah, that's not great. But also all of the stablecoin, man, let's say you had $6 trillion that flew it out of banks and flowed into stablecoins. That means you're having $6 trillion of demand for US treasuries. And typically the core treasury is the US 10-year, which is what prices almost, like, obviously you have short-term credit instruments that are priced on the Fed discount rate, but most of the rates people care about, which are mortgage rates and other things, are all pegged to the 10-year interest rate. The 10-year interest rate is likely lower because of all the demand from stable coins buying up US treasuries, which you otherwise wouldn't have. So it's like the economy should benefit from that. And also you're making it much easier for people that can't access dollars all over the world to access dollars using stable coins, which again is more demand for US treasuries. So there's a very good economic impact, which people very much highlighted during the Genius Act, how patriotic it was to have these US-backed stable coins going all over the world. So I feel like we lose the narrative a little bit when we only care about the big banks' business model.
Yeah, Josh, David, to that point, the other aspect of that is it really puts to bed the idea that we've been hearing for many years, Adam, that foreign nations are going to start dumping treasuries, down with the dollar. And the truth of the matter is the entirety of the multi-trillion-dollar stablecoin market are buyers of treasuries. That really puts an end to that dynamic. Adam, Josh, go ahead, Josh.
Oh, I have some questions about this stuff. Oh, sorry, I was on mute. I just realized. I have some questions about this stuff, if it's okay before we move on.
Go for it.
I think one thing is, how influenced, if at all, do you think people will be now that China, reportedly, the People's Bank of China has reportedly permitted commercial banks to offer yield on the digital yuan? Like, how much is that playing in, if at all?
Well, I think you'll see other countries try those strategies. I mean, one thing people always like to note is like, I think USDC has a version of Euro. I think it's called EuroDC, and no one wants it. No one wants to buy it. No one wants to trade it. No one wants to use it. I think the liquidity in like USDC is in the hundreds of millions, maybe in the trillions of dollars. I think the liquidity in the Euro token is like a couple billion, maybe like they're orders of magnitude difference, and it's like people want dollars. People don't want euros, and people likely don't want a digital yuan backed by the Chinese government that's going to allow them to surveil every transaction you have, even if you get a yield, and then put controls. Because as far as I understand, the digital yuan, the central bank of China has complete control over the digital yuan, can freeze any transaction at any time, can take it out of your bank account at any time, and they have complete control over that ecosystem. So I think even on an unequal playing field where Genius Act stable coins can't offer yield, most people still want the dollars, so they're going to forego the yield for getting the dollars. But again, I think if they could offer yield, I come at this slightly from a biased point of view. Just as a disclaimer, I do work at Figure Technology Solutions. We do have the only yield-bearing stablecoin in the market, and the way we were able to get there is it's registered as a security. And you can pay it as a security because it's a fixed income instrument that's registered as a face amount certificate, and it's a 40 Act investment company. But those are some of the challenges that you deal with if you want to pay yield in the United States on a stable coin. It's like you explicitly have to label it as a security or something like that, because the Genius Act doesn't open a path for you to do that outside of these reward gaming mechanics that were included.
Adam, thanks so much. Josh, go ahead.
Sure. So I have one other question. I'm sure more will arise, but something that comes to mind, for a long time, you guys know, in the crypto space, we've been wanting to get a market structure bill, to put it mildly. Now, with the changes that were in the draft that were not acceptable to Brian Armstrong, based on his statements, when we think about next steps, right, and who is pushing for what, like, is it, in your view, is the banking lobby pushing now for market structure to be able to close that feature / bug / compromise in the Genius Act? Yeah. Or would if there isn't an agreement, are they okay with just backing off? Because then they do still have Genius and what Genius says. So I'm just curious about how motivations may have shifted. Oh, actually, I have one sub question. I'm calling it a sub question. It's actually,
I noticed the large coffee you had earlier.
Yeah,
Josh.
well, it's got everything percolating with these questions. But I guess so my follow-on question from that, if it's okay, is, say we get a position in the Senate that is passed, whatever it may be. Is the House likely to just accept that when that might differ from clarity? Or are we going to see the same thing play out again in parallel in the House?
My thinking has always been that this will play out almost exactly like Genius did. If you can get the compromise in the Senate that gets you to 60 votes, likely what will happen is it will pass the Senate, and then the president will call up the House members and say, you're going to vote for this. And as we know, at least the House Republican caucus, if the president of the United States calls up the House Republican caucus and the Speaker, Mike Johnson, and says, you're going to vote for this, this is administration policy, you're going to support our policy, they've shown almost 100%, I think it's like 99% if I guess you include the Epstein vote, but leaving aside that, it's almost 100% record that they're going to support what the White House supports. So it really would come down if the White House said, "Hey, go to conference committee and iron out these issues and compare the House tax, compare the like how a bill becomes a law, how we're all taught in school." That's not really how bills become laws lately, at least in the last few decades. Really, because it's become so hard to achieve bipartisan consensus in the Senate and get those 60 votes. I think the House is always sensitive, and especially the White House, if their interest is in bill passage, sending it to conference and potentially undoing some of the specific compromises that were made to win individual senators' votes is very difficult. You saw this, like the House wanted to reopen the one big beautiful bill to get rid of the carve out for Lisa Murkowski in Alaska, and the White House said, "No, you're not opening a Senate because we need her vote. And if you open this up and take that out, she's not going to vote for it, and the bill's going to fail." So I think you see those dynamics a lot, whereas usually these compromises in the Senate are very complex and carefully negotiated. And typically the White House has a huge role in that too. Like once we get out of markup, once we get to the Senate floor, the very end of the process is typically a manager's amendment where the Senate majority leader will essentially substitute his preferred version of the bill for whatever the previous version of the bill was. Yeah. Usually it will look like the bill and with some changes. Sometimes it doesn't. But usually the White House is very involved in that final process, and they usually will get yes, no say on that final version that they'll vote on.
Adam, Josh, I just want to be cognizant of time. Appreciate it. Great questions, Josh. Adam, let me ask you, and Josh, let me ask you both this question then. Let's get to the nuts and bolts of it. What would that compromise be that would work for the banking industry and bring Coinbase, for example, back to the table?
I don't know if you're going to get I don't know if you're going to get Coinbase, like the Coinbase position and the bank's position or not. I don't think they're going to reconcile. So I think what is going to happen is the senior leaders in the Republican Party in the Senate, so this would be Chairman Scott of the Senate Banking Committee, this would be Leader Thune, this would be Chairman Bozeman of the Agriculture Committee. They're going to have to make a choice as to which lobby they're going to give preference to. Clearly ingenious, they give preference to the crypto lobby. If they want a bill, they're going to need that because, as I said, I just cannot see a bill passing without the support of Coinbase and the entire organization behind them. And if you know that is the requirement for passage, that kind of gives you an indication as to which way the language will eventually go. If you want it to pass, I think the banks do want their provision, but I think they're also perfectly happy with the rules around crypto being ambiguous and making it harder for their competitors to operate. So I don't think for them market structure failing is like a disaster.
Yeah, and for completeness sake, Josh, I think something we should throw out there as well is, we've talked about the banking lobby pushing on this very hard and the impact of that. There are other portions of the market structure legislation as proposed that have come back as kind of a negative for the opponents of crypto, particularly DeFi and private wallets. I mean, Adam, Josh, we need to speak to that as well. Is that an easier series of problems to overcome, given the sausage making in Washington? Or are we looking at three separate problems that might be irreconcilable?
So the way I would view it is, I think the stablecoin problem can get solved. I think that they will be working and probably are working right now, trading language back and forth with the government affairs team at Coinbase that I used to work very closely with when I was there. They're great. They do great work. I'm sure they're trading language with Brian and Paul Graywall and trying to get them on board. Then you move to the other two provisions he highlighted. One of them you noted was DeFi, and one of them was the tokenized stock language.
Yep.
Most of the tokenized stock community came out yesterday and said that this language isn't a problem for us. We don't mind them doing a study. We're happy for a joint rulemaking. So I think that's more of a side issue. I know Coinbase's business model is slightly impacted because they now have stocks and they use APEX clearing and they're an introducing broker. So it's a little different. But I would say the DeFi issue is difficult, because I think the Biden administration really struggled with this as well, most people agree that DeFi should be exempt from regulation. This is the position that was taken in the European Union under MiCA. This is the position that has been taken in the United States generally, which is essentially DeFi activity, which is pure self-hosted, self-custody wallet where I trade individually with somebody else, or I interact with a protocol, essentially a piece of code that's publicly published, and I choose to interact with that. That is not a regulated activity, at least under any of our previous securities or commodities laws, because there's not a regulated intermediary. Usually where regulation comes in the United States is on the intermediary in the transaction. It's not on the individual initiating the transaction. So the question would be, how and if do you regulate these DeFi front ends or the intermediaries or the control persons? I think they tried to strike a balance in this version. I don't know if it was the greatest balance they struck. Again, another problem here is they didn't really outline much. They outlined that they were going to punt to the agencies and let them define what is common control, what is a control person, when are you truly an intermediary of a DeFi front end, what is real DeFi versus versus not actual DeFi name only. So I think those are still very difficult questions, and I think if we see a bill, it will likely take the form of the Senate Banking Committee, which is just to punt all of the hard questions to the agencies, because I don't think that they're going to be able to come to an answer.
So that brings me to something, and Josh, I got to pull you into this, and I know you probably have a question. It really feels a bit ironic because a lot of this seems to be punting to the agencies in the wake of Chevron. Am I misreading that?
I mean, no, you're not misreading it. I mean, yes, I will say punting to the agencies on one hand, well, I feel like there's different ways to punt to the agencies, right? If there is no bill, if there's no law, and the agencies just use their rulemaking power that hasn't been made part of their statutory authority granted to them by Congress, then, I mean, let me say, I don't know the exact answer to this, right? But as I think about it, it would seem to me that at least if you have a bill saying, hey, agencies, this is for you to figure out, then you do have congressional authority, right? Whereas if we don't have a bill and the agencies just say, you know what, we have the ability to engage in rulemaking and various other things, like we're seeing in very helpful ways right now by the CFTC, by the SEC, others, right? That I think could be open to potential attack, including on partisan bases, for exactly the reason you mentioned, Ron, which is now we don't have Chevron deference. So I know, Adam, you have thoughts on this because we've chatted about it before. I think.
You can open that door.
Well, I think Josh is generally correct. Is that I think legislation that specifically authorizes them to do rulemaking would, I think, be in line with JANXI, I think is the new one, post Chevron. But the question there and the problem there is, as most people listening and you guys know, we still have rulemakings from Dodd-Frank that the agencies were mandated to do within 180 days, and we're 12 years, 13 years on, and those rules have never been issued, produced. So it's like, if you punt to the agencies, you might get the outcome you want. You might also be stuck in a bureaucratic limbo for a decade and never get the clarity that the Clarity Act is supposed to provide. So it's like, the more prescriptive you are in the legislation, the much more clarity you get. Punting it to the agencies then introduces the unknown kind of when will they act? What will the rule be when they act? They will likely go through a notice and comment procedure, so that will get industry feedback. You don't know which way it will look like in the final. And then, as we all know, if the administration changes in now 3 years, we finished almost year one of the Trump administration. If it changes in 3 years, all of that agency action can reverse on a dime, just like it did when the Biden administration left and the Trump administration came in. So that's you feel much more certain if you have the law. But if you can't come to an agreement on the law, a lot of times the agreement among the senators is to punt. And so that's what they do.
Adam, Josh, I want to come back to the DeFi thing because I think it's an important part of the consideration. And Adam, thank you for the feedback on how that process works. When you talk about things like DeFi, and we're really talking about kind of peer-to-peer engagement, that's been one of the talking points for, you remember, the anti-crypto army, when we talk about things like customer protection. And to be clear, when we talk about the WSBA and colleagues like the both of you, we get the importance of consumer protections and investor protections. Adam, what does that future look like from a political legislative perspective in a world where people are able to do more peer-to-peer? And I would argue a lot of people would not say it's caveat emptor.
Yeah, I think so. I think first off, you're not going to have likely the investor protections, as you said, you would get by buying a security
Right.
or something like that, because then
Right.
you get SIPC protection, you get a variety of other protections. You could do a derivative lawsuit against the issuer if they materially misled you. The thing about DeFi is it is a bit caveat emptor because it's your assets, your wallet, and typically you're interacting with a piece of code. You're not even interacting with another person on the other side of the trade. There may be a piece of code that intermediates a trade between one and two people, but then you get into the problem of like, well, what is that code? Who can be like, who can you sue? The always problem is like, you can get a judgment, but who do you attach it to? How do you collect it? And so that's one thing I think you need to consider with DeFi. But one thing that I think came in the legislation that I think you will see them go towards is basically for most DeFi protocols, and many of them do incorporate these already. There needs to be some sense of sanctions screening or something on the, not probably the KYC AML, because you have so much of the Solana ecosystem that's permissionless, and you're not going to get a lot of hardcore people ever to do KYC AML.
Yep.
But that doesn't mean you can't have wallet screening from some of our friends at TRM Labs, from Elliptic and other things, to make sure you're not interacting with a sanctioned wallet. You're not having the Lazarus Group from North Korea launder funds through your DeFi protocol. So that seems to be where the compromise is like ensuring that if you have a DeFi protocol, even if you're not going to regulate the intermediary specifically, some requirement that you have these just basic levels of screening to ensure you're not engaging in sanctions activity, things like that.
Adam, Josh, to that point, Josh, when we have these conversations about DeFi, and again, from your perch, I know you can't mention specific firms, but going off script a little bit here, how much of the work that crosses your radar is truly DeFi work?
I mean, it depends on who you ask, right? Because there's DeFi and there's DeFi.
Yeah.
I mean, I would say, relative to other types of work, small, right? A small percentage. I do think, though, the BSA style, the Bank Secrecy Act style requirements being applied, as Adam has noted, that's a very sensitive issue. My understanding from what I've read and what I've heard about the reactions to yesterday's kind of rejection of the market structure markup was that people in DeFi were saying this is perhaps a chance to reset the conversation, right? Because as Adam noted, I do think that these are bigger issues. I do think also it makes me think back to what the DOJ said in connection with the Tornado Cash developers, and not pursuing charges of unlicensed money transmission where there's no criminal intent and things like that. And so I think the interplay with that agency position, I don't know why these two things go hand in hand. Like, where do you draw the line? Like when you are imposing these types of requirements, at what point are you imposing them on the developers, right? Because
Josh, to that point, I think one of the things we often talk about on our biweekly, the legal working group calls, I want to do a shout out to Michelle Gitlitz, who does a lot of our state work, and she's our state co-chair for one of them for the legal working group. I don't know if you both saw it, but I think this morning that the New York State Assembly put forward an unregistered or unlicensed virtual asset provider. I'm probably mangling the words. There are criminal penalties for not being licensed to do that in New York State. I haven't read it in its entirety, but Adam, Josh, how much of what we're seeing in Washington impacts the state level conversations?
Well, I think it does, because I know, at least when we were considering the bill, at least when I was at Coinbase and also previous, these are other conversations, federal preemption was always kind of like the holy grail that people were seeking, because most crypto companies, if they want to have a 50-state presence, have to get 50 plus money transmission licenses right now. And
that's easy, right?
Yeah, just only 50 plus state regulators. And if you include the territories like Puerto Rico and other people, you might be up to like 53 or 54 state regulatory regimes. And these are just the MTL regimes that are essentially just to transmit money, which are well known and have been around Then you have New York with its bit license regime. Illinois is introducing a regime. California is introducing a regime. Yep. So for many of these companies, we don't just operate domestically, we operate globally as well. It is very difficult to have to deal with 50 plus different regulators, and not like just like money transmission licenses. Those require exams and other things, but then the bit license obviously is much more extensive. California's version, Illinois' version seem to be mimicking that approach. Yeah. So I think that's one of the huge things that people wanted out of market structure were, give us the federal path. Give us the path that all of the banks could go through if they want to go through the OCC, that SEC registered firms could go through if they want to issue equity where they don't have to comply with blue sky laws and other stuff in the States. And the commodities, same thing. You can go, but you're seeing it with prediction markets and the battle over sports betting. I think that was part of the New York bill, as they're trying to regulate prediction markets. Yep. But you're seeing that same thing play out where you have state sports gambling regulated at a state level and state regimes. And then these prediction markets are going to the CFTC and saying, hey, we can operate everywhere in all 50 states using one unified standard. I think that's kind of what we've all been looking for in the crypto and digital asset industry is, what is that national standard? What are the rules of the road for us to walk into the SEC and say, this is the activity we want to do. This is how we get registered. This is how we're compliant. Same thing on the CFTC side. So I do think it has a huge impact, because if it fails, then it's all left to the states. And then you're going to see California, New York, and Illinois kind of go wild because they know that the federal government's kind of sitting out.
I'm going to go ahead, Josh. Sorry.
Oh, I was just going to say that, well, with respect to the Crypto Act that was, that's the act from yesterday, one of the things that's been said about it is that it reportedly aligns with the treatment that 18 other states already are imposing, right? About making it a crime if you operate a virtual currency business without appropriate licensing. So I guess at some point, yes, we're looking for a national answer. But how many states do we need? I guess this is, up for debate, right? Whether if all states end up deciding the same way, that is the national standard. But, are we starting to see obviously 18 or 19 out of 50.
Like a critical mass of states.
Yeah. And to what extent does that play in? But I think also, if we're looking at bills that may be signed into law at some point by the president, who is obviously Republican, it would be interesting to note, and I haven't looked at this, how many of the states that are aligned with this Crypto Act actually are blue states versus red states.
I feel like Adam's got an opinion on this.
I feel like he did too. His face flickered.
You noticed that.
Say is just one thing I think to keep mindful as ideas while Josh is speaking is, if clarity doesn't pass and this effort fails, as we go into 2027, and now we're out of a midterm year, and if you believe the prediction markets, and if you believe the way recent elections have gone, and if you look at the president's poll numbers, chances are very high, at least if I haven't checked the latest Kalshi odds, but I think it was 75% or more, that the Democrats are going to take the House. And I think there's increasing odds they may take the Senate as well. You are going to see the Democratic states get far more active if they have allies in Congress that have gavels and subpoena power in a way that they're not. They're a little cowed right now because the Democrats are out of power at almost every point of national leverage. That will change. So I think if you don't have a federal bill to fall back on and you don't have preemption to fall back on, you could see state AGs in New York, in Illinois, in California get very aggressive. And you're also going to have multiple governors from those states potentially running for president. I'm thinking about Illinois and California specifically, where Pritzker and Newsom are two of the main people potentially running. So you could see this as an issue to pick a fight with the administration, an issue to really go after some crypto players to say, hey, they're being lax on the beat and we want to go protect consumers and go after fraud. The old anti-crypto lobby talking points, but you could see a lot of those resurface in next year, which kind of only increases the urgency of getting something at the national level.
Adam, I want to turn that around a little bit, and Josh, coming out of the conversation that you put forward really elegantly. David, David, sorry, Adam. But at no point does the federal government and Congress say, well, it looks like 18 or 19 states have this regime. We should really follow what they're doing, right? There's like that doesn't weigh in on deliberations that are happening on Capitol Hill. For an outsider like me, is that correct?
It doesn't, but again, it really depends if you have preemption or not. If you have preemption, then it really doesn't matter what those states do because they could write whatever law they want. But if the federal law says it preempts the state law, the Supreme Court has consistently taken the position that the federal government does preempt state law if they explicitly enumerate it and it's within their enumerated powers. But also, as you look towards legislative passage, definitely you have senators from those states that are not just going to ignore the will of their state legislators and of their governors that are calling them up and saying, hey, we just passed this bill. The thing you're negotiating on Capitol Hill kind of goes against or is against our interests. Those could be influences on individual senators, on House members. And as I said, if we do see a change of control in 2027, you're going to have Democratic chairman of the House Financial Services Committee and the Senate and potentially in the Senate, but the House Ag Committee, of these important committees that will have subpoena power and the ability to hold hearings and the ability to push their view of what they think legislation is. So I would be very careful and we've always talked about this, to not have the industry miss its opportunity because it might not come around again for a decade or ever.
Yeah. Like Adam, good point. Josh, I've got to pivot a little bit. I'd be remiss if we didn't cover markets. And I just wanted to ask, when you pour your weekly martini with 3 olives and meet with the Klayman family office, have you been surprised, and Adam, weigh in on this as well, at almost how calm the markets seem to be relative to the news out of DC?
Yes, actually, I have been. I mean, not that I'm
you didn't deny the martini or the family office, Adam.
I mean, there are days and there are days. But yeah, no, I mean, I have been surprised. For example, I mean, pleasantly so.
Yep.
Right. I think given the announcement of yesterday about the market structure bill, one could have seen a more dramatic effect. Right. I do think the statement that I believe was made later on yesterday, I think it came out later yesterday, that there are ways to salvage and still move forward. Yep. I think maybe that was helpful in terms of stabilization. But yeah, I mean, I think I'm happy.
Adam, are you as plugged into watching the markets when David and I send Josh text messages at 10 p.m. saying, did you see this market price? And I'm sure she's blocking us at some point.
I definitely follow it. Obviously I work at a company in the crypto sector, so it's not that it's not important. But yeah, I wasn't super surprised by the price action because I do think the market probably learned a lot from Genius. There were a lot of fits and starts. There were a lot of times where Genius very much looked dead and then came roaring back to life. And so I think the market is a little prepared for that. I think it started to rally kind of past this range it's been in, which was kind of below 94 on Bitcoin price, when you thought that the markup was going to happen. And I think after Armstrong's comments, you've seen it kind of trade in a very narrow range, trying to fight to get above. It might be harder for Bitcoin to reclaim that 100,000 level without legislation. But if you do look at the movement when Genius was passed, that was incredibly bullish for the sector and for assets, at least in the short term. Obviously, they gave up most of those gains throughout the year, but at least in the immediate passage and afterwards, it was seen as a very positive step for the industry and for assets in general. I think what we're all probably eager to find out is, regardless of what happens, do we break the 4-year cycle this year finally? I know a lot of people have predicted that we will, and obviously last year was not a great year. As it turned out, obviously it started very well, but it didn't end.
Started great.
But that will be very interesting, I think, to find out, is if we do get a major catalyst like that, and then it still can't break the 4-year cycle, then I think kind of we all just have to say this is kind of the way this asset trades, and we have to be prepared for it.
Adam, it's a good point you raise. I am deeply in the camp of, we have the latter part of 2025 indicated the breaking of that 4-year cycle. Many of the largest cap of the cryptos are trading very much like much more mature asset classes. And we see the fund flows that reflect that. We see the ETF flows that reflect that. And again, I'm leaving off the alts and some stuff, and David will beat me up about that at some future point because some of those do have an interesting use case. But I don't know if you agree with that perspective, Adam and Josh, but I think the 4-year cycle has evolved into something much more nuanced and much more like regular assets. We've only got a couple of seconds left, and I know you're both busy. Adam, it was so good to see you. For everyone in the audience who's watching, thank you so much. If you have additional questions for Adam or Josh or I, info@wsba.co. Adam, I don't lightly ask people to make predictions, but if the door closes between now and call it mid-February, do we not get market structure this year?
I would say it's very unlikely. I would say the only wild card there is it seems that the president is very committed to this bill, and at least the track record of the Republican Congress is when the president is committed to something, he typically gets what he wants. So I think that is, but if you're going by normal legislative history, the farther and farther we get into an election year, it becomes that much more difficult to get any kind of bipartisan consensus. Primaries are going to start relatively soon, and they even are starting in the next few weeks in some states. And that will really kind of clarify the partisan lines, because obviously you run towards your base during the primary, which makes you very partisan. And then you don't try to really come back to the center till the general. And typically by that time, it's way too late for any bipartisan legislating anyway. So I think we're in a critical period now over the next couple of weeks. You don't want to see the momentum lapse. You don't want to see these markups kicked out indefinitely. You want to see future iterations of the text that were produced, and you want to see amendments, and you want to see people making changes to them. I do think there's still definitely a window for getting passage. I do think that the fault lines that have developed are bridgeable to get passage. And so I think that should be everyone's focus right now, is figuring out what those fault lines are and trying to work a way past them. But the farther and farther we slip into February, it becomes much more unlikely that you get anything.
Adam, I'm still trying to parse dealing with the words normal and legislative in one sentence. I'll have to have a cocktail to do that. Josh, go ahead.
So I'm just wondering, in both of your perspectives, assuming state parties can get there on CFTC versus SEC, pieces, right? And digital commodities and, all those sorts of terms that we've, been contemplating.
Yep.
Is there any world in which we have some sort of agreement on that and passage of some kind of bill that is limited to that and just leaves stablecoins out to be fought another day? Or is that just not?
So you're talking about a carve out in a way.
You're just talking about a skinny down version.
A skinny version,
I think it's possible, but I think the complicating factor there is that some of these provisions are so important to some of the biggest parts of the industry that they likely would not feel comfortable moving forward if their issue just gets left on the sidelines. And they would probably say no bill is better than a bad bill, as Brian said in his comments. So I think that's the hard part. But there is definitely everything I've been told by, as Ron, you've been up to the Hill, and we've had multiple WSBI members up to the Hill. I know other organizations have been up there. I know a lot of people are talking to a lot of different senators and staff members. I know people are working very diligently and very hard, and everyone is acknowledging that they're working in good faith. I don't think anyone wants to walk away from the table knowing that this opportunity might never come again. So that is why I'm still relatively hopeful you can get to something.
Yeah.
But it may have to adopt some of the approach, Josh. Like some of these issues, if they can't be bridged, you may have to leave them on the sidelines. But that act in itself, while you might use it to get passage, might on its own complicate passage. So it's a very complicated game of three-dimensional chess.
Josh, did you see how elegantly he brought up our upcoming April trip to Washington, D.C. with the Wall Street Blockchain Alliance Group?
Yes, indeed.
Well, hopefully we're there to discuss passage of legislation that's already happened.
Exactly. Let's hope. Josh, go ahead.
I'm coming up with more and more thoughts. I mean, one of the things I think that's been talked about with one of those controversial points is about people who already are getting a form of stablecoin yield. Like, this isn't speculative, right? It's there. Like, I'm just wondering whether, constituents, not just the crypto folks, but like people at home who are not part of crypto organizations, whether they will be surprised and unhappy if they find out that their legislators, make their ability to get yield impossible.
No, I would think so. Supposedly the lobbying around Genius, from what I heard, had an effect. Stand with Crypto obviously has a lot of people they can activate to call senators' offices when they feel they need to.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't count out that fact. And if you believe what Brian said on CNBC yesterday, what he said is he's doing this for consumers. You can take that for what it's worth, but in his mind, he's fighting on behalf of the American consumer against the big bank lobby.
We live in interesting times. It'll be interesting and important to see where the next couple of weeks go. Adam, thank you so much. It's great to have you as a guest. We'll have to have you back. Josh, as always, I hope you didn't mind the Klayman family office joke, but it really has traction. Wishing you a great weekend. Shout out to everyone of you who watched on YouTube and on LinkedIn Live. Please subscribe. Please share with friends. And if you've got additional questions, again, info@wsba.co. We will see you next week. Have a great weekend, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.